Olena, thank you very much that you provide a background on how actually the idea of this book was developed. It was challenging for everybody, including myself, because when I got the first invitation, I said that my first reaction would be like, no, I can't do any kind of research. It does not make any sense. Then I had to evacuate to Germany with my kids, and I was overwhelmed with all these, problems of being a refugee. But then, for some reason, I've decided I had to do something basically the data from media was the only one source of information for me, because that time, of course, we did not have any other kind of data like surveys or interviews. Now we have many, but media was, again, the only one available source of the information. So basically, it's my contribution, chapter 1, happy to be. And actually, my basic research question that I try to examine the role of media and social media in constructing gender ideas and expectations on femininity and women's roles in the context of war. And basically, in my chapter, I move from more traditionalistic and more essentialized images to more agentic and emancipatory images of women in media. And it's not the logic of my paper as such, but this is the logic of how media space actually is developing in Ukraine, in the sense of growing professionalism of journalists and the growing impact of feminist ideas on media reality of Ukraine. And I hope that my chapter contributes as well to this widespread idea that during any wars, we are dealing with so-called patriarchal renaissance, right? Definitely. The idea, the perceptions of gender role, they're becoming more traditionalistic. And in my chapter, I argue with this statement by showing this movement from, again, more traditionalistic perceptions of women to more emancipatory. I focus both on images of military women, but on civilian military women, of course, I guess the reason is obvious because, these images, they are challenging traditional gender orders. That's why probably their images becoming more popular in media representation. I have analyzed basically 53 materials, mostly textual, but as far as I have the chance to show you some images, I will use this possibility to show you more visual representations with maybe some basic patterns, right? So my task does not provide any quantitative perspective, right, about the prevalent images, but more kind of diverse patterns or storylines of these representations. And as I have mentioned, I will start from more traditionalistic, and I will start from two leading models of Ukrainian femininity since Ukrainian independence. And it's so-called Berehynia and beauty. Berehynia literally translated as somebody who takes care of or somebody who protects other people. This image, as you can see on the left part of this slide, it's a mother, patriot, Christian, so it's a very nationally colored, right? And it was actually, it's a long history how this image appeared, and Ukrainian historian Oksana Kis brilliantly expressed this history in her works. And the second one is beauty. Okay, on this image on the right part of slide, it's not the beauty in a more, glamorized way. It's not a Barbie as such, right? But it's a certain type of mixture of this Berehynia style, which is very traditional one, with more kind of consumerist style of representation of women. And these images, they are still relevant in some media representations of women. For example, in social media, like, for example, something that we can name as a militant Berehynia, right? So an image of a woman who represents both beauty, both Berehynia, and some masculine features, like, for example, holding a machine gun. And these images of beauty and Berehina we can track still less, but still in some images of women in the military. And in my chapter, I provide much information about the context because, of course, media space constructs the reality, but at the same time, it reflects the reality, right? And if we look at the data related to women in the armed forces about this context, we know that the professional army is open to women with almost no restrictions, mainly under the influence of the advocacy research project Invisible Battalion. And we know that currently 42,000 of women serve in the army, while 5,000 of them on the front line. We know that women in military still face, despite this progress on gender equality in the Ukrainian army, they still face sexism and sexual harassment. And we know that the armed forces in Ukraine, like in many other countries, they were associated with masculinity. But now we have the huge progress on this issue. Like probably one example that, according to the result of the last survey conducted last year, 80% of surveyed Ukrainians, they associate the image of veterans equally with men and women. But what kind of images we are dealing with related to media representations? And I was dealing with one challenge because sometimes media, it's not only about the gaze of a journalist on women's images, but it's about the view or women's identity, how they construct their images, right? And some of them, they still represent themselves as, for example, Berehina. Like, for example, in this quotation in Deutsche Welle story, I believe that every woman, even if she's not married and does have no children, and in any case, she is Berehina. She takes care of those who are close to her. Guys may become kinder, calmer, whatever. It's a woman being interviewed. She is a part of so-called territorial defense, semi-military structure in Ukraine. One quotation that represent like mixture of traditional and emancipatory attitudes in this quotation. Many times I was asked why I, a woman, went to the war. The fact that I'm a woman does not mean that I'm weak. If I'm pretty, it does not mean that I can't be smart. Just because I can cook does not mean that I can't shoot. And then, who, if not a woman, the Berehina of the family hearth? So here we can see the mixture of these emancipatory and traditionalist attitudes. And what about beauty? Beauty in construction of these images, it's still popular, less than it was like 10 years ago, but it's still popular. For example, this is a picture from a beauty contest initiated by Minister of Defense of Ukraine in 2017, Berehina with the shoulder straps. And if we look at those nominations, for example, Miss Charm, Miss Grace, Miss Photo. Let me remind everybody that it's beauty context for women in the army, right? And if we look at the media images of women in the army, this beauty construct is sometimes still happen. Like, for example, here you can see two examples. The right part, the date not indicated, but I guess it's 2017, but the left part, it's pretty recent, and we are like here we see that women, they are presented in the feminine, they are touching their faces, so they are smiling directly into the camera, so they are presented in a very feminine way. But now we are dealing with more diversity in this sense, and these images, I would assume they are becoming less feminized. Like, for example, this example, I did not include it in my paper, it's pretty recent, from Elle journal, Women on the Front, and in the same issue you can see different types of images. On the left part, it's, I would say, a little bit more feminized, but the right part of this slide, you can see Katerina Babich. By the way, she's from my native city. Now she's a mayor of Poltava city. She's presented in her daily activities, right? Not in this classical feminine style. What are the types of storylines we are dealing with? Like, for example, one of these, I'm not a girl, I'm a soldier. A was has no gender. In these types of materials, journalists, they speak mostly about the professionalism and motivation of these women who serving in the army. And I understand why it happened. It happened just a response to gender stereotypes that a woman's place is not at war, right? And they show that this is their choice. But on the other hand, this type of discourse might lead to gender insensitivity. If we claim that a war has no gender, it seems that there is no place to discuss serious gender-sensitive problems for women in the army. For example, sexual harassment, or the lack, still we have the problem of the lack of women's uniform in the army. But of course, we have more pro-feminist images as well that are promoted by pro-feminist resources in Ukraine. There are many, like Povaha, Gender in Details, NGO Ukrainians Women's Veteran Movement. And for example, we have some media materials about women who are struggling with sexism in their military formations. Like, for example, this material, and this is a poster that Lesia Ganja, feminist activist, got into her military formation, right? And she was very critical about this, and this is a media representation of this case. What about civilian women? Of course, civilian women, sometimes they are presented as victims of the war, right? And we have many stories about, like, this very famous case of Mariupol Maternity Hospital, right? March 2022. We have many materials on women who are given birth in bomb shelters, who were evacuated with their kids. On Ukrainian Madonna, for example, who protected her kid. And while at the same time we have more agentic and emancipatory images of women who resist. For example, in social media, Arm Ukraine Now, a mother who provides a child care and care for pets, and at the same time, she demands to supply more weapons for Ukraine to protect Ukrainian people. And, for example, heroines of the war to women remain to work in supermarket in European despite the shelling, right? So we have these materials as well. And some interesting cases, Nastya Tiha, who helped to evacuate disabled dogs. And the last slide, it's many tags, representations on how women abroad contributed on supporting Ukraine, right, on different protests. Thank you very much.